So I'd like to welcome everyone here for today's proceedings. What brings us all here, as I think we intimated a little bit from the opening performance that we chose to sing for you, is that the world is changing at a faster rate than ever before. And the potentials that didn't exist even a year and a half ago have opened up now to a world that is, for the first time, one that we can faithfully be optimistic about. A world where an opportunity for a completely new economic, physical, political, cultural architecture can now blossom in ways that we haven't seen since the death of John F. Kennedy. I'm going to go through a little bit of some of the most important developments relative to that point, and I will open up a little bit for Fred, who will give the main presentation, which is the third in a series of lectures he's given so far to us in Montreal on the topic of what role does classical music play in the future. This is something which is somewhat controversial, since a lot of people tend to think of music, as much of our culture, arts and other things, as being something which is based in a certain period, a certain style, a certain mechanism of rules, perhaps, of the past. We are of the view, with the Schiller Institute and the Committee for the Republic of Canada, that that is not true, and that in fact culture is something which is constantly developing, it's constantly in a situation of flux, and it's shaped by individuals who, whether they are inspired by an identity of littleness and mediocrity, or whether they're inspired by an idea of greatness, will determine the quality of creative output that they make in their lives, whether it's in the form of theater, whether it's in the form of music, or whether it's in the form of poetry, or whether it's in the form of scientific discoveries. And as many of you have come to know, people like Max Planck, Beethoven, and some of the greatest scientists of our history have located their creative means of making discoveries in their relationship to their arts. You know, Mozart's relationship to Einstein is amazing. Without his relationship to his violin, Einstein said he could not have made the discoveries that he's renowned for having made. This goes on for a while, and Fred will touch on some of these elements, as he has in previous lectures. Today, we have to confront the fact that mankind is not a species defined by cycles of just ups and downs, as many historians have portrayed. Right? We have periods where there's just a Renaissance period, and that's why great ideas happen, and there's periods of dark ages. No ideas tend to happen. It's the period that determines the quality of minds that come out of it. That's not true. It's individuals who step outside of their historical conditions, as Schiller said, and rise to the challenge of the ideal that is within themselves to express, to both discover the laws of the universe, and then to live by and be instruments for those laws in changing the course of human destiny, I guess is for lack of a better word. And this ability to imagine a world which is both reasonable, which is necessary, which is rigorous, and which is beautiful and moral are the conditions of any great leader, from Martin Luther King to John F. Kennedy to Lyndon LaRouche to ourselves today, as we go and shape the world that we're born into. This brings me to one of the themes of my opening remarks, which is that today we celebrate two historic anniversaries of two figures who are on the screen right now. I guess people might be familiar with one or both of these individuals in question. So on the left is, anybody notice who that dashing figure is on the left?
Correct.
On the left. Not his left. Nope. No, it's Beethoven. So today is the 190th anniversary of the death of Beethoven. And on the right is a fellow who, for those who have been on the LaRouche website, have encountered quite a few times, Kraft Erika, who was a leading space pioneer, a leader of the Apollo projects, the whole space program under Kennedy, a leading scientific thinker who made many inventions in new rocket technology in his lifetime, and was a great friend of our organization in the late 70s and 80s, and gave many presentations with our organization promoting not only scientific exploration of space, the collaboration amongst different cultures around what makes us most universal and beautiful and capable of discovering the cosmos together, but something even deeper. Both of these individuals, what made them unique is that they were both living in times where a choice was being made between whether we should go into a society that would be based upon comfort and a fixed order of nature, where mankind would adapt to the rules of the game of the times that he lived in, or whether he would take the challenge of continuing a tradition of creative change and becoming enthusiastic of walking into the unknown with the confidence that we have within ourselves, regardless of our culture, the power and of creative reason to tackle any challenge that befalls us. And that's always the problem, right? Whenever you walk into the unknown, whether it's to try to defeat gravity by flying or whether it's going into anything you've never done before, there's always a danger that you might fail. But you have to have faith that you have the capability of overcoming those dangers and to create a concept which is a solution to any problem. Both of these figures, Beethoven lived during a time of American revolutionary ideas spreading all across Europe, was inspired by those changes and that idea of mankind that was based upon the rejection of monarchy, hereditary power, the rule of a few over the many. And one couldn't properly or honestly understand his creative works if they didn't understand that his identity was so situated in that faith that mankind was destined for something better, and that the American experience in establishing a rule based on natural law rather than the law of the few was the destiny of all mankind. The fact that that didn't successfully replicate after the French Revolution and into Austria where he lived, and Germany and beyond, is not the fault of Beethoven, but it's rather the fault of the people who didn't take up the challenge that he put forward to continue the mission of accelerating the scientific and musical discoveries that were being made up until his time, and political discoveries. The time that Kraft Erika lived in was a period where he himself had influenced the thinking of people like John F. Kennedy, who decided to take up the challenge of putting mankind onto a trajectory of having a future outside of the threat of nuclear annihilation. And when John F. Kennedy made the challenge, or made the offer to the Russians to work together with America to jointly explore space together at the United Nations, that was a testament of this very optimistic view, that the space program was never about beating the Russians to the moon, as we're often taught. It wasn't about making money. It was about establishing a new epoch of cooperation. And Erika saw that with the death of John F. Kennedy, just as Beethoven saw with the assassinations of the great leaders of the French Revolution and the failure of the people of Europe to adopt the ideals of the American Revolution, that we had a choice to either continue down a path that would lead us towards an oligarchical fascist order that would be self-destructive, or whether we would be able to pick up the torch and continue where those who led the revolutions of the 1770s and 1960s left off. And we're now at that same situation where we can now revisit those choices. Kraft Erika was attracted to the organization of LaRouche because LaRouche was running for the presidency during this period of the 70s, of the 80s, when Kraft Erika got to meet us and began working with us. He was attracted to it because LaRouche was not just trying to run for a power position. He had a complete philosophy of mankind that was in harmony with something he had discovered as a scientist. Kraft Erika wrote a paper in 1957 called The Anthropology of Aeronautics, which I selected a small segment of, where he wrote his thoughts very clearly down. And this is not anyway. He wrote, "The concept of space travel carries with it enormous impact because it challenges man on practically all fronts of his physical and spiritual existence. The idea of traveling to other celestial bodies reflects to the highest degree the independence and agility of the human mind. It lends ultimate dignity to man's technical and scientific endeavors. Above all, it touches on the philosophy of his very existence." And this is a painting that Kraft Erika, who himself was also a painter, as well as a lover of classical music, he painted to help people conceptualize the world that he knew was in our destiny, of a moon colony in 2033. He painted this in the late 50s. I think the title is Christmas 2033 on the Moon.
Wow.
His point was that mankind was the only species that has both a biological framework, but is not bounded by its biological, genetic, and other environmental laws. If we were, we never would have been able to penetrate beyond the atmosphere that separates the biosphere and intergalactic space. The fact that we have demonstrated a capability to do that means that we have within us something deeper as a species characteristic, which no other form of biological life that we've ever seen in the biosphere can do. We can actually bring and recreate our biological conditions that we evolved in on the Earth into a situation where we can terraform a planet That's not something that's just for Hollywood. This is something which is, there's no evidence that's ever been presented that that's not doable. And in the course of his philosophy and his discoveries and his efforts against the new agenda in the late 60s and 70s that had sprung up hegemonically in the Western cultural and economic matrix, that said, no, mankind is actually not supposed to go into space. We pollute too much, we consume too much, and if we tried to colonize other planets and explore the cosmos, we would be going outside of our nature. We should stay within our home. We should stay within the fixed environment of the Earth, and that is our nature. He was struggling against this new ideology that had become popularized and dominant by the assassinations of the late 60s, Martin Luther King, Robert F. Kennedy, and into the 70s, and he was pushing against that. But he said, no. In fact, mankind must obey the fact that it's a fact that we are the only galactic species that we've yet discovered. We're galactic because we can go into the galaxy. And because of this fact, he established in that same paper 3 fundamental laws, which he called the 3 laws of aeroastronautics, where he said, and this is the basis for all economic, political discussion amongst cultures, he said, for all times. These are constants. But that the first law is that nobody and nothing under the natural laws of this universe impose any limitations upon man except man himself. The second law is that not only the Earth, but the entire solar system and as much of the universe as he can reach under the laws of nature are man's rightful field of activity. And the third law is that by expanding through the universe, man fulfills his destiny as an element of life, endowed with the power of reason and the wisdom of the moral law within himself. And this is a very, very important idea. I mean, the idea of this 2033 space colony, the moon colony, this is not only completely realistic in his time, because originally we weren't supposed to cancel the Apollo programs. And in fact, you can get merit students' encyclopedias published in the 1970s that actually say that by 1984 we should have our first Mars colony. That was the original agenda. That was artificially sabotaged. And he makes the point that in these 3 laws, we are the only species that imposes constraints on ourselves based not only upon our knowledge of what we are and what the cosmos is, but also upon the moral development of our constitution, our personal constitutions. Right? If we are not actually maturing our emotions to desire those things that not only ultimately good for us, not only now, but also into the future, and not only ourselves because we're part of the human body, all mankind, if we're not cultivating those sentiments and those desires that give us pleasure when we both improve as well as mankind, then if we're not doing that, we're ultimately acting in the form of a virus. Right? Those pleasures that we satisfy ourselves with, but that ultimately hurt us in the future, our families, or all of mankind, as you can see with most Wall Street traders, whose personal passions might seem good to them in the moment, but ultimately you look at the destruction that they wage upon all of mankind. It's really hard to find a difference between a Wall Street trader or an oligarch and a virus. Now the trick is, and he understood this as well as LaRouche, that the smoke and mirrors that was put upon our eyes during this period is that these same Wall Street, City of London, British Empire oligarchs who LaRouche has been exposing over the course of these past 50 years have been trying at least to convince us, the citizens of the world, that we are the virus. That it's actually in our nature to do nothing but destroy, to satisfy bestial impulses, and that's our nature. To not explore the universe, to not come up with greater standards of beauty. So, we reject that. And a lot of people would say, oh, what hubris, that one individual would come up with laws, immutable laws of man to organize yourselves around. But these are not laws as such, they're not fixed rules. They're actually the types of laws that you think through what these mean. They actually allow the greatest degree of freedom. They're not laws that constrict our freedom. They're laws that if we recognize that we actually have an internal wisdom and moral law, and that all nature constantly strives to go to its boundary conditions, going back to 500 million years ago, right, where we just had single-celled life that couldn't even get out of the liquid environment of the Earth. All of life constantly strives to go to its boundary conditions and then come up with new forms of biological technologies that allow that species to then overcome those limits and then expand, colonize beyond, to the point that we're able to create an environment in which reptilian life, amphibian life, mammalian life could come into being, constantly with this directed potentiality to produce something even greater in the future that would be able to then overcome yet more limits. To the point that mankind is the first self-conscious, reasonable embodiment of that process that we've ever been able to see. Up until now, it's been happening outside of the will of the amoebas and the bacteria and other forms of life that does have creative evolution, but it doesn't think about it. We do, and we can choose to act in opposition to it too. LaRouche also came up with several laws. As a scientist, both he and Kraft Erica met on common ground because they recognized that they made common discoveries in the universe of universal laws that allowed them both to forecast the future. And LaRouche, in May 2014, laid out a series of those laws, which basically run through as, some of these are relatively applicable to the moment of crisis that we're in, but all of them have within them a principle that is universally going to be true in 1,000 years from now, 1,000,000 years from now. There's something constant, as well as something practical. But the first law is that we are facing the biggest economic meltdown of human society's experience. The whole financial system is sitting on a multi-quadrillion dollar derivatives bubble, which is tied in to the real economy. And as it stands, when that financial system blows out, when these derivatives cease to have value and things melt down under hyperinflation, if there's not a systemic addressment of that, then everything real, pensions, savings, food production, the real economy is going to be sucked down into a dark age. And so he made the point that the Glass-Steagall Act is the first thing that needs to be done for anything else to work, but it doesn't work by itself. As soon as you do Glass-Steagall to take down Wall Street's mega casinos, all of a sudden, a whole new series of obligations are going to demand themselves be acted upon as well, which is why the second, third, and fourth laws are also on the table. Establish a Hamiltonian national bank for infrastructure and manufacturing. Invest trillions in the highest technology new infrastructure. And as fourth law, develop fusion power. Return to the moon and to deep space with human colonization and development. And in 2014, this is a period where the Ukraine crisis had just hit. The U.S. The State Department under Obama had just overseen the overthrow of an elected government in Ukraine with a policy of getting a potential war with Russia. We had the Syria crisis that looked hopeless. A program of war with China under Obama and the British that was getting worse and worse by the day. This seemed like the most unlikely series of things that anybody could imagine. And now we've never come as close as we are right now. Specifically, what LaRouche made the point of is that this is the reactivation of the American system with the most advanced discoveries in economic science to this day added to it. And most people think, well, America, what is the American system? Isn't that empire? Isn't that the thing I've known for the past 45, 50 post-Kennedy years? Isn't that America? And up until now, the LaRouche organization has been literally the only one to talk openly about the fact that no, there has been a genuine American system in alignment with the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence that every great president who tends to get shot at or poisoned is acting upon. And this is something that up until now, really only our organization has been talking about. Until Donald Trump became president of the United States. And something happened. Something that I'd say very few people expected would happen, but that the necessity of the crisis objectively hitting the world demanded happen. And Trump, in the last week, has begun actually speaking about the American system by name, with the representatives of that American system being spoken of by name, which we have never imagined a sitting president having said, except the last time this happened was probably William McKinley, assassinated in 1901, who was him, and then you had several more leading up to Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy who represented this tradition, but nobody has spoken so aggressively, openly, and repeatedly about this. And I'm just going to read a small segment from a speech that he gave at a Republican convention not that long ago, where he's trying to extract the neoconservative agenda from the Republicans and return them back to their Lincoln roots, their Lincoln traditions. And he actually said, these are three excerpts where he says, "I called it the American model, and this is the system our founders wanted. Our greatest American leaders, including George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Jackson, Lincoln, they all agreed that for America to be a strong nation, it must also be a manufacturing nation. The Republican platform of 1896, more than a century ago, stated that protection and reciprocity are twin measures of American policy and go hand in hand. We renew and emphasize our allegiance to the policy of protection as a bulwark of American industrial independence and the foundation of American development and prosperity. Imagine the breakthroughs that will breathe fresh life into forgotten places. Picture the new roads that will carve pathways all across our land, and we need them. And think of the new inventions that will lift up the sights of our nation. Finally, as we imagine this new prosperity at home, let us also work to achieve real and enduring peace abroad. So not free trade, fair trade. There's a difference. The idea that every nation has a right to control its own credit rather than having private central bankers running credit policy for nations. This is built into the Constitution. This is built into the American system. This is something which is being acted upon, the idea of protectionism. These are all things, and the fact that Trump has also spoken openly several times on the need to restore Glass-Steagall is very important. Which is why none of you have heard about this who watch the mainstream media, right? The fact that something actually useful and necessary is being spoken of in American establishment circles is the reason why the very mainstream media that most people go to shape their perception of the world doesn't talk about it. And you have to literally go to the government White House to see any of this stuff. Now, to boot, it's not just about the American system, because Kraft Erica spoke about human space exploration as the destiny of man, and the means by which mankind would discover what we truly are by going out of our comfort zones and into a world that would demand constant advancements in knowledge. As soon as you go into that place, you can't turn back. You have to always be committed to discovery. Now, Trump punctuated this week as well by initiating what's called the NASA Authorization Act of 2017, which I'm going to play a small segment of, not even small, I'll play a video that was put out by the White House, just to make this more realizable, because it's good to say these things, but do you actually have a plan to back it up in action? March 25th, yesterday morning, the White House put out this short video to demonstrate what the spirit is of the new NASA bill. It's the first one in 7 years to be put out in public.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
My fellow Americans, this week, in the company of astronauts, I was honored to sign the NASA Transition Authorization Act right into law. With this legislation, we renew our national commitment to NASA's mission of exploration and discovery, and we continue a tradition that is as old as mankind. We look to the heavens with wonder and curiosity. More than 2 decades ago, one scientist followed this curiosity and dramatically changed our understanding of the universe. The year was 1995. Taxpayers were spending billions and billions of dollars on NASA's Hubble Space Telescope. The astronomer in charge had a novel idea. He wanted to use the expensive telescope in a totally unconventional way. Instead of pointing Hubble's eye at nearby stars or distant formations, Robert Williams wanted to peer into the void. He aimed the massive telescope at one of the emptiest regions of the night sky. For 10 days during Christmas of 1995, Hubble stared into the abyss, seeking whatever light it could glean from the darkness, and it was total darkness. Fellow astronomers didn't know if he'd see much of anything, but Williams was rewarded, and the entire world was struck by the awesome images of our satellite return. In that tiny patch of sky, the Hubble Deep Field showed thousands of lights. Each brilliant spot represented not a single star, but an entire galaxy. The discovery was absolutely incredible. But the unforgettable image did not satisfy our deep hunger for knowledge. It increased ever more and even more. and reminded us how much we do not know about space, frankly, how much we do not know about life. With this week's NASA reauthorization, we continue progress on Hubble's successor, the James Webb Space Telescope. It is amazing. The Webb telescope is set to launch next year. It will gaze back through time and space to the very first stars and the earliest galaxies in the universe. We can only imagine what incredible visions it will bring. At a time when Washington is consumed with the daily debates of our nation, I was proud that Congress came together overwhelmingly to reaffirm our nation's commitment to expanding the frontiers of knowledge. NASA's greatest discoveries teach us many, many things. One lesson is the need to view old questions with fresh eyes, to have the courage to look for answers in places we have never looked before, to think in new ways because we have new information. Most of all, new discoveries remind us that in America, anything is possible if we have the courage and wisdom to learn. In the span of one lifetime, our nation went from black and white pictures of the first airplanes to beautiful images of the oldest galaxies, captured by a camera in outer space. I am confident that if Americans can achieve these things, there is no problem we cannot solve. There is no challenge we cannot meet. There is no aim that is too high. Whatever it takes and however long it will be, we are a nation of problem solvers, and the future belongs to us. We are truly a great place to be. I love America.
So we actually have a president sounding like a president for the first time in a long time. Very odd. A lot of people almost couldn't believe their ears when they heard this. I know I had to listen to it a couple of times for it to fully sink in. But when we take into consideration that not only is this something which is being done as an American policy, this is something that, as LaRouche has made a point over the past 40 years, it's actually being done as a policy of mankind. Trump will be meeting with Xi Jinping in a couple of weeks in Florida. What's going to be top on the agenda undoubtedly will be discussion of America's participation in the One Belt, One Road policy, the new Silk Road that our organization has been promoting since the early 1990s. The new development banks are already in place. The Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank is in place. The BRICS Development Bank and many others are coming online as ways to fund, through massive productive credit, these types of projects that are sweeping across the globe, connecting Asia all the way through Europe, into Africa, into the Americas through the Bering Strait. And every great leader, you'll find, especially Lincoln and these American system leaders, they always refer to the issue of the policy of mankind through the language of music. And one of the current representatives and leading forces behind the New Silk Road, a friend of Xi Jinping, is State Councilor Yang Jiechi of China, who even recently made the point that the Belt and Road Initiative is not a China, he said literally, was proposed by China, yet it is not going to be China's solo show. A better analogy would be that of a symphony performed by an orchestra composed of all participating countries. So it's not a question of forcing your will upon the world, but rather creating as an example a certain vision that is in harmony with the interests of everybody else, that everyone can begin to harmonize with and work with, because it's in everybody's self-interest to develop and to grow and to make discoveries. The current overview of the One Belt, One Road, as it's been revived, is based upon high-speed rail corridors and other forms of connecting roads, conventional rail and development corridors with new cities, new energy corridors, strung all throughout the linking lines between China all the way to Europe, through Russia, with a maritime Silk Road component, which is already benefiting over half the world's population at an accelerating rate and providing an expression, an active expression of the American system today. Ironically, it's not coming from America because it's never, though it was named the American system, was always a universal system. It was applicable to all countries where human beings lived. And the extension of this, which we've written reports on at length, which anybody here can purchase copies of, subscribe to the EIR magazines, which are available at the entrance point, is the World Land Bridge, the global New Silk Road. Many of these links that we see as a focus from the Bering Strait will be featured in discussions over the 2 days that the Belt and Road Conference will be happening in May in China, which will feature already Putin, over 25 heads of state around the world, and hopefully Canada and the United States under Trump. China is already the leader in space exploration. They're becoming the leader faster and faster, and when you combine both the development of the Earth that this thing entails and the ending of global poverty and hunger, as well as the lifting of the bans that are preventing the U.S. with working with China that are currently in place, we could have a completely new paradigm and a new renaissance for all mankind in a shorter period than anybody realizes. So the question of music, the question of science, the question of culture, and the question of freedom are all linked together, and this is the topic of Fred's presentation. So I hope everybody here takes good notes, begins to actually work with us, and enjoys the upcoming presentation by Fred Haight. Okay. So I'd like to welcome everyone here for today's proceedings. What brings us all here, as I think we intimated a little bit from the opening performance that we chose to sing for you, is that the world is changing at a faster rate than ever before. And the potentials that didn't exist even a year and a half ago have opened up now to a world that is, for the first time, one that we can faithfully be optimistic about. A world where an opportunity for a completely new economic, physical, political, cultural architecture can now blossom in ways that we haven't seen since the death of John F. Kennedy. I'm going to go through a little bit of some of the most important developments relative to that point, and I will open up, we'll determine the quality of creative output that they make in their lives, whether it's in the form of theater, whether it's in the form of music, or whether it's in the form of poetry, or whether it's in the form of scientific discoveries. And as many of you have come to know, people like Max Planck, Beethoven, and some of the greatest scientists of our history have located their creative means of making discoveries in their relationship to their arts. You know, Mozart's relationship to Einstein is amazing. Without his relationship to his violin, Einstein said he could not have made the discoveries that he's renowned for having made. This goes on for a while, and Fred will touch on some of these elements, as he has in previous lectures. Today, we have to confront the fact that mankind is not a species defined by cycles of just ups and downs. This brings me to one of the themes of my opening remarks, which is that today we celebrate two historic anniversaries of two figures who are on the screen right now. I guess people might be familiar with one or both of these individuals in question. So on the left is, anybody notice who that dashing figure is on the left?
Correct.
On the left. Not his left. Nope. No, it's Beethoven. So today is the 190th anniversary of the death of Beethoven. And on the right is a fellow who, for those who've been on the LaRouche website, have encountered quite a few times, Kraft Erika, who was a leading space pioneer, a leader of the Apollo projects, the whole space program. A little bit for Fred, who will give the main presentation, which is the third in a series of lectures he's given so far to us in Montreal on the topic of what role does classical music play in the future. This is something which is somewhat controversial, since a lot of people tend to think of music, as much of our culture, arts and other things, as being something which is based in a certain period, a certain style, a certain mechanism of rules, perhaps, of the past. We are of the view with the Schiller Institute and the Committee for the Republic of Canada that that is not true, and that in fact culture is something which is constantly developing, it's constantly in a situation of flux, and it's shaped by individuals who, whether they are inspired by an identity of littleness and mediocrity, or whether they're inspired by an idea of greatness, many historians portrayed. Right? We have periods where there's just a Renaissance period, and that's why great ideas happen, and there's periods of dark ages. No ideas tend to happen. It's the period that determines the quality of minds that come out of it. That's not true. It's individuals who step outside of their historical conditions, as Schiller said, and rise to the challenge of the ideal that is within themselves to express, to both discover the laws of the universe, and then to live by and be instruments for those laws in changing the course of human destiny, I guess is for lack of a better word. And this ability to imagine a world which is both reasonable, which is necessary, which is rigorous, and which is beautiful and moral, are the conditions of any great leader, from Martin Luther King to John F. Kennedy to Lyndon LaRouche to ourselves today, as we go and shape the world that we're born in.